The first thing Mara Ellison heard was purring. Not the gentle hum of a single creature, but a deep, layered chorus of it, overlapping vibrations that rolled through her chest like a second heartbeat. She surfaced slowly from unconsciousness, her mind dragging itself up through dark water, and the purring was the rope she followed. She didn't open her eyes right away. She catalogued damage first, the way her survival training had taught her. Her left shoulder throbbed. Her ribs ached on the right side. Her throat was dry as Martian dust. But she was warm, impossibly, completely warm, in a way that no standard-issue medical bay blanket could account for. Then something small and heavy shifted on her legs. Something else pressed against her side. A third thing, larger, exhaled a breath near her ear that smelled of raw protein and something musky and wild. Mara opened her eyes. The ceiling of the Caraway Station medical bay looked back at her, white and sterile and utterly normal. Everything below it was not. Kale was the first thing she focused on, because Kale was always the first thing she focused on, even before she'd known his name. He was the largest of the predator cat cubs, barely 4 months old by Varan reckoning, which meant he was already the size of a Siberian husky and twice as opinionated. He lay pressed against her right side, his massive triangular head resting on her rib cage with an ownership that brooked no argument. His golden eyes were open, watching her with that particular intensity that had terrified the station xenobiologists and made Mara feel, inexplicably, like she'd been recognized. He blinked slowly when she met his gaze. Once. Deliberately. In Varan body language, she had learned, that was the equivalent of hello, I acknowledge you as someone worth acknowledging. Coming from a predator subspecies, it was practically a love letter. Kale, she said, and her voice came out as a croak. He shifted his head, a 2-kilogram movement that sent a bolt of pain through her injured ribs, and made a sound low in his throat. Not quite a growl. Not quite a word. Something in between that she had started, privately, to think of as her name in his language. On her legs, she found Joe and Wa curled together in a knot of spotted fur and overlapping limbs. Joe was the smallest of the 7, with a notched left ear from whatever had happened before the station crew had found the litter, abandoned, half-starved, in the wreckage of a Varan transport. Wa was Joe's shadow, always. Where one went, the other followed. They were both asleep now, but even in sleep their paws occasionally twitched, reaching for each other. Mara looked to her left. Mi was draped across the pillow beside her head, lying on her back with all 4 legs in the air in a pose of such complete physical trust that it made Mara's throat tight. Mi was the cub that had bitten xenobiologist Dr. Hartmann on their first day aboard the station. Mi was the cub that had shredded 3 equipment bags and 1 irreplaceable botanical sample. Mi was currently making small, burbling sounds in her sleep that Mara had come to understand were the Varan equivalent of dreaming. Beyond me, tucked into the narrow space between the medical bed and the wall, New York and De, pressed chest to back, their striped tails wrapped around each other. They were the twins of the litter, or the closest equivalent, born within minutes of each other, inseparable ever since. New York was darker, almost charcoal across the shoulders. De had a white blaze on her forehead that the research team had noted with considerable scientific interest and Mara had noted with the simpler observation that it was extremely cute. That left Yi and Hai. Mara found Yi sitting upright at the foot of the bed, watching the medical bay door with the focused attention of a sentry on duty. Yi had always been the watchful one. The cub that paced the perimeter of any new space before settling. The one that positioned himself between Mara and anything unfamiliar. The xenobiologists called it proto-guardian behavior, a relic of ancient Varan pack instinct. Mara called it Yi being Yi. Hai was on the floor beside the bed, standing on her hind legs with her front paws braced on the mattress, watching Mara with enormous amber eyes that were a shade too old for her face. Hai had always looked at Mara like she was trying to solve a particularly interesting problem. 7 cubs. All present. All here. Mara became aware that she was crying only when she felt the wetness on her temple, tracking sideways because she was lying down. She didn't try to stop it. She wasn't the kind of person who wasted energy on that. She remembered, in fragmented pieces, what had happened. The containment breach in Lab 7. The Varan cubs in their enclosure directly adjacent, and the automatic lockdown protocols that had not accounted for the ventilation system connecting the two spaces. The toxic particulate. The 17 seconds she'd had to get all 7 of them into portable oxygen hoods and get the hoods sealed before the contamination reached them. She hadn't had enough time for herself. That was fine. That had always been going to be fine. She'd made the calculation in the first 3 seconds and she'd been at peace with it. What she hadn't calculated, what she had not, in her thoroughly practical human brain, been able to account for, was Cale. Cale, who had shoved his sealed hood off his head, even as she'd been telling him to keep it on. No, Cale, stop, you have to keep it on. Cale, who had then pressed his massive forehead against the faceplate of the emergency oxygen mask she'd managed to get over her own nose and mouth in the last possible moment, and breathed against it, and held that position, 4 months old and already nearly 50 kilograms of absolute stubborn refusal to leave. The others had crowded in behind him. 7 cubs forming a warm, purring, oxygen-sharing barrier between her body and the compromised air. The station's atmospheric sensors had later confirmed that their massed body heat and the air displacement from their breathing had created a microenvironment around her that had bought her an extra 4 minutes before the emergency response team had breached the lab. 4 minutes. In the medical report, Dr. Hartman, the same one me had bitten, had written, in the careful language of scientific documentation, the behavior displayed by the Varan juvenile cohort is without precedent in captive or observed wild specimens. The decision to remove sealed oxygen equipment in favor of proximity-based protective behavior suggests cognitive and social bonding capacities significantly exceeding current xenobiological models. Mara thought that was a very long way of saying, the cats saved her. She thought her way was shorter and more accurate. Cale shifted again. This time he moved upward, which hurt her ribs considerably, until his nose was against her jaw. He made the sound that was her name in his language. I know, she said. I'm here. He made the sound again. Differently pitched. She'd learned, over 6 months of working with the litter, that he had at least a dozen distinct vocalizations for her name, and they weren't interchangeable. This one meant, you were gone and now you're back and I am not going to move from this spot for some time. Okay, she said. Her voice was still a croak, but steadier now. Okay, Cale. We can do that. Joan was stirred at her feet, lifted their heads, assessed the situation, and settled back down. Me rolled in her sleep and ended up with one paw on Mara's cheek. New York and they made a sound together, harmonized, almost musical, and went quiet again. Ye held his post at the foot of the bed, but his tail, which she'd noticed always moved when he was less guarded than he wanted to appear, swayed once, twice, slow and deliberate. Hai put her chin on the mattress edge and looked up at Mara with those amber eyes that were too old for her face, and Mara looked back, and something passed between them that she couldn't name with any word she knew in any language she spoke. The medical bay door opened. Dr. Hartman stood in the frame, chart in hand, and looked at the scene before him. 7 predator cat cubs. 1 recovering human caretaker. Enough combined territorial presence to make a grown xenobiologist take an involuntary step backward. Ms. Ellison, he said carefully. You're awake. Yes, said Mara. The cubs, he glanced at his chart, as if it might offer guidance. It did not. They wouldn't leave. No, said Mara. They wouldn't. He stood there for another moment. Then, quietly, with something in his voice that sounded like a man revising a long-held professional opinion, how are you feeling? Mara looked at Cale's golden eyes, half-lidded now, satisfied. She looked at Joe and was sleeping tangle, at me's trusting sprawl, at New York and his quiet closeness, at Ye's faithful watch, at Hai's ancient amber gaze. Warm, she said. It was the most precise answer she had. End.